You're watching The Big Scope and welcome to another edition of All Tech here in India's first post-cable network. On the show today, I've got with me a special gentleman from Mozilla. He's one of the senior policy director at Mozilla. His name is Ohai Ben Avi. Ohai, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
First up, I want to understand what is wrong in the way developing internet economies are going about formulating data privacy policies.
I wouldn't say there's anything wrong. Certainly, there are some countries that are more advanced in developing these kind of protections in law than others. Certainly, a major moment right now here in India, following I think the Padaswamy judgment for the Supreme Court in August of last year, made it very clear that privacy is a fundamental right guaranteed by the Indian Constitution, as well as, of course, by international treaties like the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which India is a party to as well. It made very clear that this is a fundamental right and that it must be protected in law. And so now we've seen that process to develop, a strong, we hope, strong data protection law for India. And I think, as more and more people come online, the stakes are only growing higher, and the need for these kinds of protections in law is only growing greater. And so I think that's why we're seeing a wave of countries that are developing these protections now.
So the other thing I want to understand is, everybody talks about this next billion in India. People who are going to use the smartphones for the first time, people who are going to use mobile phones, smartphones, people who are going to use internet for the first time. How do you take the conversation of data privacy, data security, data, all these things surrounding around policy? How do you take these conversations to those people who are going to use internet for the first time? Millions are going to use internet and a smartphone for the first time. How do you make them understand this is what data privacy means, this is what policies mean, this is what net neutrality mean? Or is it that all these discussions are only an elitist topic?
So I think for starters, the law needs to understand and create a conducive environment that protects people. Certainly people who don't have the understanding or the experience or the literacy to really read through privacy policies and prompts. That's why we need strong protections, strong obligations on companies that are handling data, as well as the state, of course. That there is a strong regulator who is looking out for those individuals. And that's really important to have as part of the law, and making sure that the law evolves to protect people in that way. But I also think at the same time, this is why digital literacy is so important. It has been a major activity of the Mozilla Foundation for many years to help people understand, what is data, what is the internet, how do these things, play out, and how can you protect yourself online. I mentioned the Mozilla community as well. We are the Mozilla Corporation, right? Is best known for making products like Firefox, Focus, more privacy-enhancing browser, Rocket, that's recently launched in Indonesia, focused on more cost-conscious users, and so forth. We are owned by the Mozilla Foundation, a nonprofit charity organization, and so unlike some of our other friends in industry, we are driven by our mission. And then we have the Mozilla community. We're an open source company and an open source project. All of these are open source at the end of the day, and so there's a very vibrant contributor community that volunteer their time to support Mozilla's mission, and as well as our product development. And in that community, we have about 10 to 12,000 volunteers here in India, which makes it by far our largest volunteer contributor community anywhere in the world. And a lot of those contributors are doing digital literacy trainings, in their schools, in orphanages, in their local communities across India, to help people to better understand, what is the internet and how can you use it, and how can you protect yourself online.
So Mozilla had invested around 1 crore in India for open source projects. So what has happened on that front in the last so many months? Give us an idea.
I'm so glad you asked that. So as part of my responsibilities at Mozilla, I am the administrator of the Mozilla Open Source Support Program. If you'll give me a moment, I'll sort of walk through the different parts of this program. So we are, as I said, an open source company. We were born out of the open source and free software worlds. And so to start with, we want to give back to that community. And second is we want to help support the development of these technologies into the future because we believe this is a vital part of the internet ecosystem. So we have 4 tracks. The last one is about India, and I'll get to that in a moment. The first is our foundational technologies track. So, we as an open source project have dependencies on other open source projects, and we want to make sure that those projects are supported and that they thrive in the world. So track 1 supports projects that we have dependencies on. The second is our global mission partners track, which really supports any free software and open source project that advances Mozilla's mission around the world. Track 3 is our secure open source fund. So bug bounties work really well for us and Google and Facebook and Microsoft and US Defense and everyone else because we actually have the infrastructure to assess those bugs and patch them. But the open source technologies that the internet really runs on, that everyone depends on day to day, often lack that kind of infrastructure. And so the Secure Open Source Fund pays for security audits and remediation for widely used open source technologies. And I should be clear, Indians are welcome, more than welcome, to apply for any of those tracks. But then we also, as part of our efforts to internationalize the Mozilla Open Source Support Program, we developed a dedicated track of funding here in India, our Global Mission Partners India track, which is $200,000 worth of funding every year. So that's 0.44, depending on your exchange rate that day. And that, again, is dedicated to any free software and open source project that advances our mission around that and benefits the Indian community.
So since we're talking about policy, data privacy and all of that, now there are a lot of these IoT startups that I've seen in India and other parts of Asia. Now, IoT is a device which is connected to the internet. Now, my question to you is, isn't it difficult then to formulate privacy policies or any kind of policies for the IoT device ecosystem, because all these devices, there's millions and millions of devices, they're all different from each other. So since there is no standardization, how do you formulate a policy for the IoT ecosystem in terms of data privacy?
Yeah, so, I think while IoT is pushing the boundaries of what we understand about technology and bringing technology into the home in different ways, for example, the underlying issues, are still the same. If you're collecting data, from the user, you might be collecting it in a new way through IoT than, has previously existed. But still the core interest is the same, right? Of protecting the user, of making sure they understand what's happening with the data that they're entrusting to this IoT service, this IoT product. And so, that's where you get data protection. If you are, have security risks, right, with your IoT product, which, many do, and part of the natural evolution of a new product category, right, is figuring out new security risks and vulnerabilities. There too, we want to apply generally the same cybersecurity best practices as well as norms and regulations to the security risks, in emerging IoT products.
A lot has been said and done about net neutrality in our country and other parts of the world. So what do you make of TRAI's recent recommendations on net neutrality?
So Mozilla engaged through the 2.5, 3 years of consultations and open house discussions with TRAI around net neutrality. And we're incredibly excited about these regulations, advancing. I think, India's net neutrality law is one of the strongest net neutrality regulations anywhere in the world. And so I think Indians should be very excited about that. And I really hope that this regulation will be a model to the world. Absolutely. And I think it was a really thoughtful and thorough analysis that TRAI did, and throughout the process, but also in the final order. But I also think that the way that India has chosen to implement net neutrality, putting the net neutrality conditions into the license of telecom service providers is super strong. I mean, I don't know of any other country that has done that, and that really means that if a telecom service provider is violating net neutrality, is throttling, speeds to an app or to a service or to a website, for example, or blocking a site or a service that you want to use, they could lose their operating license over that. And if I'm a telecom lawyer, then I'm going to tell people we have to respect the law.
Indians right now consume a lot of video content on the internet, but a lot of videos on the internet rely on a patented technology called H.264 video codec. And organizations have to pay millions and millions of dollars in licensing fees to bring us these videos. So my question to you is, does Mozilla have an alternate to H.264?
So it depends on which part of the video stack you want to focus on. I think HTML5, does offer a lot of opportunity, for video, certainly within the browser. We've also been investing in the AV1 codec, which substantially improves compression, and I think it is definitely going to help those users keep data costs more easily under control. And so I think that's an exciting frontier for technological development.
The goal has always been to get more people online. But in today's scenario where with cheaper data prices and cheaper smartphone prices, where everybody has an access to internet and a smartphone, how do you take care of the digital gender gap in India?
Well, I think, first of all, while India and across the world has made great progress in connecting the unconnected, there remains still a lot of work to do. And I think this is one of the great challenges of our time, is to connect the unconnected. And certainly the gender digital divide is critical to this. The digital divide in general, that so the ratio of people connected to unconnected, is getting better, but the gender digital divide is actually getting worse. And so I think this is, something that we must be vigilant about and design for specific programs. I think that we need to have, there's a couple of different areas, to counteracting some of the, patriarchy and misogynistic attitudes that have kept, and societal cultural issues that have kept women offline. I think partly there are dedicated efforts that can really help, in terms of representation, in terms of, specific outreach to women and girls. One of the most really interesting sort of innovations that I've seen lately came from Vodafone, I believe, I'm not sure where, but there was a pilot project focused on female kiosk vendors, so that women could buy a phone from another woman, and that created a sort of safer environment to do that. And it's shown tremendous results. I also think that the more that we teach technology in schools and as expose children, certainly girls and young women, that can also help to mainstream access, for generations, right? I do think that there's also more, there are important policies that the government can enact. We see around the world, governments who don't use their user universal service funds, that are specifically designated to helping to build access. We see, certainly expansion of, BharatNet, in terms of building, fiber around the country, but that fiber often doesn't come to the last mile, to the village. Maybe you connect a gram panchayat, but you don't, bring it to the end user. And sometimes that's because, it can be very expensive, to go that, let's say, last 5 kilometers from the fiber ring to the unconnected village. But I think that there is a technology that can do this quite well. So TV white space is a type of spectrum. And currently, India has a ton of this spectrum that is not being used. that can, would dramatically change the ability to connect these rural, unserved villages. So whereas, traditional Wi-Fi networks like that function on 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz require what's called a line of sight. You have to be able to see from tower to tower. What's great about TV white space, so this is the same part of the spectrum that's used for TV, right? It goes through mountains, it goes through forests, it goes through buildings. And so it could, reach into these villages at dramatically lower cost. And last year, we wrapped up our Equal Rating Innovation Challenge, which was a global competition that was designed to catalyze new thinking and providing affordable access. And our grand prize winner was a project called Grammar out of IIT Bombay. And they are using this technology. Indeed, they have a really ingenious solution that takes that TV white space technology that lets you, go through that difficult terrain to reach the rural village. And then they switch the frequency to 2.4 gigahertz. That way you can connect over Wi-Fi using the mobile phone that you already have. And that stands to dramatically reduce the cost of access. And unfortunately, right now, the government of India is not allowing TV white space to be used for this purpose, for rural connectivity. And so if you look at what the government of India could do, that's certainly some low-hanging fruit there.
Also, lastly, I mean, the last 2-3 years, I've seen so many folks suddenly, come up on the scene and talk about privacy policies, data security policies, a lot to do with policies. But my question to you is, even in 2018, in your team or when you look out for new members, do you think there are adequate number of talented people out there who can do policy?
Well, I think policy is an exciting space, and policy debates are not just not going anywhere, but indeed increasing. Right? Like we're seeing, as we started at the top of our conversation, right? We talked about how a lot of low internet penetration countries are starting to think about data protection. We've seen policy impacts of IoT, as you mentioned, sir. And I think that the policy impacts follow shortly after. And so there's a real need for policy professionals to help societies and particularly government to think through these issues. So if you're considering a career in internet policy, I would certainly encourage you to do that. That's I think there's a really vibrant group of people working on internet policy in India. And a very robust civil society in particular. And it's always been a pleasure and a privilege to work with so many amazing professionals here.
Lovely. Ohai, thank you so much for talking to us. It's been a pleasure listening to you and in terms of what Mozilla is doing for policy, data privacy, and all of that. Thank you so much for joining us here on this show here at Big Scope. Until next time, this is Aritra signing out.